see all of you. Thank you for being here. And this morning we've got a special guest. Before anything else, in fact, it's a really special guest. I'm going to introduce a gentleman. His name is Elliot Funmaker, Sr. He's the manager and singer of the Wisconsin Dells Singer and Dance Troupe. His father, Kenneth Funmaker, formed the Wisconsin Dells Singers in 1976. He's an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation with ties to the Meskwaki settlement of Tama, Ohio. Elliot believes that there are many misconceptions about Native Americans and that education and cultural presentations change that. For example, Native American attire is called costumes, when the correct terminology is regalia. His troupe has performed at many venues, such as the Overture Center, Kids in the Rotunda, the Mount Horeb Festival, Wild West Days, and numerous schools and conferences, although his main passion is singing at Native American powwows. Please help me welcome Mr. Elliot Funmaker.
Hello, my name's Elliot Funmaker. I'm from the Ho-Chunk Nation. My Ho-Chunk name is He Who Comes from the Center of the Earth, and no, I'm not the devil. Today's a very special day for me and for you because we survived another night. The Creator, God, Maona, placed the Ho-Chunk people at a very sacred site north of here called Mogashoosh. Mogashoosh is called Red Banks. Red Banks is now called Green Bay, Wisconsin, home of the Green Bay Packers. At that particular time when the Creator breathed life into us, gave us instructions how to live our life and how to be a human being. One of the things that he bestowed upon the Ho-Chunk Nation is that we are the caretakers of this beautiful land everybody calls Wisconsin. Ho-Chunk territory at one time was from Green Bay over to the Mississippi, then down to Prairie to Sheen, then over to Starved Rock, to Chicago, and then back up to Green Bay. That whole area was prime Ho-Chunk territory. It has also been said that our territory also extended out to St. Louis and as far as Ohio. And so these areas that we talk about is considered our homeland. And so, as I was asked today to be here, I accepted the invitation to come here before you to tell each and every one of you that as good neighbors, the good neighbor policy is that if you're going to live here, then you also share responsibility of being a caretaker. So you also have that responsibility of taking care of this beautiful land with the Ho-Chunk people. As the host tribe here, there are many things that is bestowed upon us. As people came into our neck of the woods here, a lot of changes happened. And so a lot of things happen for me to be here right now. But the most important thing is I'm here and you're here. And we have to take this time for a little celebration. Not only that, to educate one another. And so when I do these presentations, it's very fulfilling for me because as I grew up in the Wisconsin Dells area, it was very fast-paced environment. Everybody was about taking care of our tourists, customers. And so everybody had to learn on the run. And so I don't think too much has changed within these last, I don't want to say how long ago it was. But one of the things that I do know is that how important education is. And for each and every one of you to be here is very promising. I'm very proud of each and every one of you. And I know that you will do your best. And, you know, I know because I have to teach things myself that is sometimes very discouraging, but I joined the Marine Corps back in the 80s, and I learned a lot of things through that. One of them is that learn how to pick yourself up and to become something above everything else, to be proud of yourself and to be a mentor of someone. There's somebody out there that needs you. I need you, my kids need you. And so each and every one of you have a very important task in front of you. And so, as I stand here before you, I just want to make sure that we come across the Ho-Chunk Nation and each and every one of you that we need each other, because education is the key to a more desirable world. Hopefully, we can get through this and the students will learn how to become part of what we're trying to teach. The Ho-Chunk way of life is a hard life. From the beginning, we have to learn how to take care of ourselves, take care of our family and the nation. And each and every one of us has a duty. Those duties change every year. And so, as we go through life, we try to do the best we can. The location where the state capitol is at right now, that did not become, all of a sudden a guy just stopped and said, well, this is going to be where the capitol. That used to be where our chief used to live, and used to have the tribal councils over. That site over there is a very sacred site. That's why the capitol is there. That's what they understood that. And so these things, we could sit here and talk about what they did to us, but the most important thing here today is that we learn, we try to get along with each other, and we're survivors. And so, as we go through different teachings, one of the things that I have been taught is that without religion, the Creator, God, Ma'ona, and other beliefs, whatever each individual chooses to believe in, it helps us as we go along in this beautiful life of ours. And so we're only here on this earth for a short while, and as we do come here and be a part of it, each one of us has a very unique talent. I never thought that I would be up here right now. I was the problem child in class, and so after I come from a very large family. My wife does too. And so we learn how to pass on our traditions, our beliefs. And so each one of us in the Ho-Chunk Nation, we do our best to try to help each other out. As here, the staff here for this beautiful town, Sun Prairie, has a challenge, and each and every one of you will be challenged. We have a song that my father made for the Wisconsin Dells area. The Ho-Chunk word itself means people of the big voice, sacred tongue, first tongue. These are very important for a lot of the tribes that are here right now are imported. They were brought here against their will as the main tribe here. It is our responsibility to treat everybody fairly and to take care of everybody. Dejop is the name of this particular site. Madison means the 4 sacred lakes. And yes, it is also the name of the casino where I want you guys to go as soon as we get done here. Go drop $1,000, you'll make my day. So as we learn these different things about our neighbor, let's keep this in mind that we also have other neighbors here. The Meskwaki, the Chippewa, Oneidas, Potawatomis, Kickapoos. They're all amongst us. Yeah, we all sound alike and look alike, but we're all different in each way, just as you are. It has been a very interesting morning already. Felt like I was back in school again, getting up early and getting my apple ready for the teacher and all that good stuff. Before I go, I'm gonna sing you a part of the Madison song. Here's how it goes. Dejop chida washide, Dejop chida washide, Dejop chida washide. de job chi do shi de yo he icha koro de job chi do wa shi de he du ska no wa shi de job chi do wa shi de yo Madison, people of Madison, stand up. People of Madison, stand up. All my friends, we come from the town of Madison. The Heduska people, hard way of life, the powwow honors and welcome each and every one of you to Madison. That is the meaning of the song. And so, even here, we have, even in our songs, we have welcoming, our hand extended to each and every one of you. As you go through life here, one of the things that I have always noticed in this area is the diversity, ethnic, and the different kinds of people that are here. And very proud of what Madison has become. And so, you know, Sun Prairie's really moving along. And so I heard there's a new high school being built. And so those are another group of students that need TLC. And so each and every one of you will have something else to think about and to do. And so, as I close today, I'm going to say a fast prayer. Ma'ona, God, please help each and every one of us here today guide our students and each other through this trying school year 2021 on to 22. And so, please, there are some people, please watch over them where they are too sick to be amongst us. Help them. Creator, God, Ma'ona, please bless the beautiful children that we're going to be seeing and helping and mentoring. Help and guide us. Aho. Pinagigi, thank you. Have a good morning. Bye.
Please help me give him one more round of applause for his blessings, his lessons, the land acknowledgement, and his service to this country. Next, I'd like to introduce the school board president, Dr. Steve Schrader. Good morning. Good morning. I always hated when people did that, but so does anybody else feel like summer was about 8 days? And every year we get a little bit older and the time goes a little bit faster. So Dr. Sarin, thank you for the introduction and thank you for your leadership, and also want to thank my friends Steph Leonard-Whitty and Janet Rosser for their leadership. Let me introduce the board members who are here, starting with Karen Dietrich, Tom Weber, and Bryn Horton. So nice round of applause for them and their service. Also acknowledge the board members who are not here, Dave Huckstra, Carol Albright, Alan Foster, and then our two student school board members who want to get one last week of sleeping, Sarah Rhodes and Carson Schmolt. So we thank them for their service and their leadership. And you all know that these are not easy days for public education. And they're not easy days to lead in public education. I just want to thank the board and our senior leadership of Dr. Sarin, Steph Leonard-Whitty, and Janet Rossiter for all they do for this school district. Next, I know we've got quite a few new staff members. Those of you who are new to Sun Prairie, stand up, please. Let us recognize you. really glad that you've decided to join the team and family here at Sun Prairie. And I want to also recognize those of you who are involved in summer school. So if you were involved in summer school in any way, would you please stand up? So thank you very much for your service to the children of this district during the summer. Chris Adler wanted me to mention that the employee wellness folks have a table out in the hallway, and so we encourage you to stop by and get some information about the wellness programs that we have in this district, as well as our employee wellness clinic, which is, we're just celebrating. We just started the second year of that employee wellness clinic, and there's information on that clinic for you, should you be interested in that. So, for those of you who are able, was it nice to travel a little bit this summer? Get away? Yeah, you can applaud your summer vacation, that's okay. So we were fortunate enough to go on a couple of vacations. One was what you might call a beach vacation, another was to the mountains. And I have to confess, I'm not the greatest person to go on vacation with. I'm sort of a type A person who just can't sit on a beach for a week and do nothing. So I did what most people do. I read and I watched a lot of Netflix. And a friend of mine had been talking to me about this TV show. Said, you have to watch it, you have to watch it. And I realized I'm a little late to the party. But does anybody know Jack and Rebecca Pearson? Toby, right? Kate, Randall, Beth, Kevin, and a multitude of partners that he may have had. So This Is Us. So I watched all 5 seasons of This Is Us this summer. I know, I don't have much of a life, but I had to do something. So I wish you would have told me how good that show was 5 years ago, and I would have watched it. And if there's a show that you like, just email me and tell me, because obviously I'm a little late to popular culture. But I'm sitting on a beach, and it's impossible not to cry in every single episode of that show, right? Especially when Randall starts crying, I'm crying, and my kids are coming up to me on the beach. Dad, are you okay? Yep, sunscreen in my eyes again. But it's a really, really great show, and I don't want to give anything away, but I will never look at my crock pot the same way. Used to have a really close relationship with the crock pot, and we no longer are on speaking terms. And if you watch the show, you'll understand. But there's one quote that, let's see if we can get this to work. Can you advance the slide for me, please? Thank you. So at the time that Tess, Randall and Beth's daughter, is dealing with her sexuality, she talks to her Uncle Kevin. And he says to her, we go through this life slowly but surely, just collecting these little pieces of ourselves that we can't really live without until eventually we have enough of them where we feel whole. And I love that. And I thought about that quote, and I thought about, isn't that what we do in education? We help students collect those little pieces of themselves. And what students don't understand is those of us who are teachers, we often learn more from them than they actually learn from us. So I love that quote. So I did a lot of reading over the summer, including on vacation. And any Brene Brown fans? There's one, thank you. Rebecca, 2, okay, we've got 3. So I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, and reread a couple of her books. And she talks about how we cultivate worthiness. And we do that through, at least according to her, courage, compassion, and connection. And I love those 3 words, courage, compassion, and connection. Because again, I think it relates directly to what we do in this school district. So courage is practiced by being vulnerable. And Brene Brown describes vulnerability as really 3 things: uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And I think it takes a lot of courage to be an educator, because every day you're faced with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. As are our students. That student who tentatively raises her hand, she may or may not have the right answer, but that's risky. And there's an element of uncertainty to that, as well as emotional exposure. So thank you for being courageous. Secondly, the compassion. And Brene Brown talks about compassion, yes, toward others, but also compassion toward ourselves. And I think especially in today's climate, don't we need more compassion and more kindness all the way around? And so thank you for providing that to our students. And then connection. Ultimately, that's what we do in education. We connect. And I don't know if you're familiar with the study. I wasn't until recently, but Harvard has done a study. It's now, I think, in its 80th year, where they took men, it was men at the time, when they were in college, and they've interviewed them every year for the past 80 years. And what they've discovered, it's called the Human Development Research Program, and it's the longest longitudinal study ever done in this area. And what they've discovered is the people who have the deepest connections not only are happier, but they live longer. And so there's the connections that we make with students, but there are also the important connections that we make with each other. I think of it as what Gary Zukav refers to as spiritual partnerships. And I've been fortunate, I'm now in my 10th year on the board, and I've developed some really deep spiritual partnerships with some folks in this district. And I just understand how important connections are. I also see those connections through the eyes of my children. I have a senior and a 7th grader. And those of you who are parents understand that you often see the world through their eyes, and I often see this school district through their eyes. And so my oldest, who's a senior, has really been impacted by many of you. And I can't name everyone, but Amy Ledford is one. My daughter had in 2nd grade at Bird School, and it was a transformational year because of Mrs. Ledford and helping my daughter develop the confidence that she still has. So Amy, I just wanted to thank you. I also want to thank the E-team at Cardinal Heights. So you do phenomenal work, and my daughter blossomed with all of you. This past year has been difficult. It's been difficult for all of you. It's been difficult for all of the children in the school district, including my 2 children. And in particular, for my oldest daughter, I want to thank Betsy Butler and Marcia Hoyer, who really went out of their way to build this deep connection with my daughter, and it really made a huge difference in her academic year last year. She's standing in the back, but Nancy Everson, I want to thank you there's nobody who makes more connections in this school district with folks in the community than you. So I personally wanted to thank you for everything that you do for this school district. And then lastly, Kelly Reindl. Where's Kelly? Yeah, she's back there. Kelly is in charge of attendance at the high school, and there's nobody in this district who is better at making connections than Kelly. As a matter of fact, you can applaud her. She's amazing. And so Kelly, I just wanted to thank you. I talked to Kelly yesterday, and what was she doing? She was going through the yearbook, memorizing faces. So when kids came in, she knew their name. And I thought that was amazing. And Kelly, thank you for everything that you do. So my youngest is a 7th grader at Patrick Marsh. And just want to talk a little bit about her year. She, in particular, had a challenging year last year. My wife and I were working. My oldest daughter has her driver's license, she has her car, she could go work and go to her friend's house, and my youngest was sort of isolated at home and struggled with that. But I want to just give a shout out to Sharon Haraldson and Chris Gleason, who band was what my daughter looked forward to every day. And I just want to thank the 2 of them. And I've told the board, and I've told Steph and Brad and others, if anybody wants to know what personalized learning looks like, just go into Chris and Sharon's classroom. That is, in my opinion, the definition of personalized learning. My daughter was in 6A and B, and I just want to thank Mary O'Malley and Matt Rowe, Mike Swanson, and Emma Markert for everything that you did last year for not only my daughter, but all of the kids in your class. And I'm only mentioning a few people, but they are representing all of you, because all of you have worked so hard this past year to make those connections with kids. We know that relationships really are at the heart of teaching and learning in this district. And again, just thank you for everything you did these difficult past 18 months, and where we thought that we were going to be starting the school year a few months ago, looks like it's going to be a little different. And I know Dr. Saren's going to talk a little bit about that. The world is changing, especially around the Delta variant, but we will get through this, and the best way to get through it is together. So just a minute or so longer, people ask me about what my priorities are for this coming year, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not on behalf of the board, but I really have two. One is I've been working with Janet Rossiter, our Assistant Superintendent of Operations, Kathy Walker, Director of Nutrition Services, and Jamie Racine, Director of Community Schools. And our goal is to put a food bank and clothing closet in every one of our schools, because we know that we have kids who are in need at every one of our schools. And as a child growing up, I was one of those kids who often I would go the weekend without eating until Monday came around. And I'm so old, we didn't have school breakfast back then. So it would be Friday lunch until Monday lunch. So the eradication of hunger in this community is personal to me. And we're going to help make that happen in this school district. And I'm grateful for the leadership of those I mentioned who are helping with that. My other priority is for those of you who are returning staff, you know this already. For new staff, you may not be aware of this. The Board of Education passed a resolution on a unanimous vote back in May, saying that as a school district, we will move away from the over-reliance of standardized testing data to assess student learning. Now, we are going to do what the federal and state governments require us to do. Right? We're obligated to do that. But we know that these standardized tests impact our most vulnerable students, our students of color, our low-income students, our students with disabilities, as well as our students where English is not their primary language. And so if we're going to be a school district focused on equity, then we need to address the overuse of standardized testing. And we're going to do that in this school district. We need to get back to a place where you are allowed to teach and you are allowed to assess student learning. Again, we will have some standardized testing that we're required to do, but I want to be clear about this. We will move away from the over-reliance of standardized testing, and we're going to stop this nonsense of teaching to the test. So, lastly, on vacation, as you know, I did a lot of watching of This Is Us as well as reading. I'm a writer. I like to write. And in particular, I like to journal, and I dabble in poetry. I don't pretend to be any good, but it doesn't stop me from doing it. I'm certainly no Dickinson or Cummings or Yeats. But again, poetry is one of my passions. And I think some of the greatest poets are actually singer-songwriters. Springsteen, Dylan, Jim Croce, Gordon Lightfoot, Carole King, Joni Mitchell, Graham Nash, Neil Young, and others. My favorite, though, is Johnny Cash. And Johnny Cash is a troubadour, and he was fighting for the downtrodden long before it became popular. I want to share this quote with you. If you can advance the slide, please. So Johnny Cash wrote, "All of your life, you'll be faced with a choice. You can choose love or hate. I choose love." And I want to thank you for also choosing love, because I believe that with love, compassion, courage, and connectivity, we can ensure that every student in the school district collects those pieces of themselves to help them become more whole. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for what you've endured over the past 18 months. I want to thank you for everything that you're going to do this academic year. Never forget that you're dream makers. I wish you a wonderful year, and if I can be of any assistance to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great school year. All right.
Check. Thank you, Dr. Schrader, Mr. Funmaker, too. I'd also like to take a moment just to thank the Business Education Partnership and the Sun Prairie Education Foundation. They are two organizations that usually present, and then today, just because of the compressed nature of the convocation, we're going to acknowledge them. And two amazing organizations that really help us be who we are in Sun Prairie. So just take a moment with me and acknowledge the Education Association and the Business Education Partnership. I'd also like to acknowledge the Bank of Sun Prairie. The Bank of Sun Prairie is one of the partners that we have, and so later on we'll get a couple of little notebooks and everything, and of course they help us fund the calendar that we send out all over, of course, the entire community that people hang on their kitchen walls and everything, and we've got one in our kitchen too, so just help me acknowledge the Bank of Sun Prairie, who's a great partner for us, and how we do things around here too. All right. I think it's working now, Matt. All right. This is what my summer looked like. Complete blur. I can't remember anything. I think I went to Disney World. We went there. We sweated a lot. We fought the entire time. 4 kids trying to figure out what rides to go on, when to eat, who has to go to the bathroom. It was a nightmare. We had fun, and it was a nightmare. And so as we're acknowledging this summer and trying to this is inconsistent, Matt. I'm sorry, buddy. There we go. And as we're rolling out of the 2020, whatever that is, and looking in the rearview mirror at that 2020 and looking forward to the 2021-2022 school year, I think it might be a little bit healing to reflect and look in that rearview mirror and just to think about what we all just went through. And so I've got a very good friend that describes what we went through as 4 major tectonic shift plates. For all of the geography teachers out there, when you're standing on a landscape and everything earthquakes right below you and your entire landscape changes. And so I'm gonna just acknowledge these 4 different types of, I don't know if they're crises, certainly earthquakes that change the landscape around us. And the first one was the pandemic. And so those 2 marches ago, when that hit us, our world changed. And it wasn't just the pandemic. It was this concept that, go ahead and advance the slide. People were questioning whether we should mask. People were questioning whether we should vaccinate. People were undermining authority. And then the situation was so fluid, it was constantly changing with variants. And so those were all ripples across our landscape that shook the ground underneath us. And I don't know about everybody. I do know. It had me off balance. I didn't really understand where I was at. And that was the first one. There were 3 more. Go ahead, Matt. And then we had this political crisis. Thank you. And the political crisis was just married with this combination of somehow undermining mail-in voting. And then also on the other end of the spectrum, electronic voting. And then undermining the actual democracy and election in and of itself. And then an acknowledgement of how powerful our voices are by trying to suppress the vote too. Sort of unbelievable. Another thing that just shook our landscape. Shook the ground underneath us as Everyone's trying to figure it out. And then on top of the pandemic, on top of the political crisis, we had an economic crisis. And that economic crisis was coupled with just all of these factors, like this eviction and like a restaurant crisis, where all the cool places that, and especially in Dane County, we choose to go and try out pulled noodles and all kinds of things that just we hold sort of dear to our heart, being in Dane County and being able to have access to unbelievable things. The crisis that we could see all of those places going through. And then literally this polarizing effect of having layoffs at the same time as watching essential workers, including us, have to do unbelievable, amazing things just to make sure that this kept going. And then we had a racial awakening. All of these things changed how we see the world forever. These 4 earthquakes that shook underneath us all happened within the last 18 months. And so for me, and I'm not going to put this slide up there for too long here, it was like this. I was off of my equilibrium, just trying to figure out where I was at on this landscape. And then we had local factors here. The timing of our reopening plans and how we just even went about doing that in Sun Prairie. The scaling up of our use of technology and doing things that we had not done before. At the same time that we're trying to figure out how we're going to set up secondary boundaries across this 79 square miles of the Sun Prairie Area School District, and at the same time building a second high school. Very, very unique things on top of those 4 earthquakes. And so I sort of feel like these last years, we were just settled in on the edge of a crisis. And I know that I felt like I was in a position where every single decision that we made was imperfect, because there were affordances and constraints. And if there's one thing that the last 18 months have shown me, at least, is that I'm imperfect too, in trying to navigate all through it. And so those were these last 18 months, and at least I think it's a bit healing to acknowledge what we just experienced together as a district, individual people, all trying to figure out just how to tiptoe through this absolute landscape of landmines to try to figure out just how to survive, just to keep ourselves whole. I think it left us stressed, and I think it left us exhausted. And where we are is okay, but like we say, we can't just stay there. Our kids, our families, our community deserve literally the best in all of us. And so it is, I think, hopefully healing to acknowledge where we were, and then also to acknowledge all right, so given all of that, who am I right now? And where do we go from here? And what have we learned? And so I've just thought about this and thought about it and thought about it. When you've got a Griswold-style family vacation all the way down to Orlando, and you've got a lot of windshield time, you have 21 hours to think about all of this. And so I want to at least advance this notion of, I think, what I've learned. And that is we are in this networked world. And I think we're in a world, this new world, where every single one of us must see ourselves as a part of the solution. And I'm going to recall back to those 4 areas of crises, those tectonic plates that shifted underneath us, where every single one of us has to figure out that we are all a part of the solution. So let's take the pandemic. The pandemic is solved when each and every one of us do amazing things. We can't get through it unless we decide to mask. We can't get through it unless we decide to listen to experts. We can't get through it unless we take the initiative to consider vaccination. We can't get through it unless we wash our hands. We can't get through it unless we trust one another. It's an amazing picture. Can I give a hand for all of the nurses across all of our schools that helped us get vaccinated? Unbelievable. What if what we face is also solved by what each one of us do? Let's take the political crisis. How is that solved? I think it's solved by when each one of us decide that we're going to be informed, that we're going to take the initiative to vote, that we're going to check our sources of information no matter what social media platform they come through, that we're going to engage one another even when it's hard to stay engaged, and talk to one another about what we're hearing and what we're seeing relative to politics. These are actual pictures of how this building right here and the Sun Prairie Area School District partnered with the city of Sun Prairie to make sure that democracy happened even in the middle of a pandemic, when they did not have the resources to be able to pull off what they did. But through working together and understanding that like every single one of us can be a part of the solution, we did solve that problem. We did make voting accessible in Sun Prairie, and thousands of people came through and voted in Sun Prairie. And so like those are the actual pictures of what it looked like. Is that you, Matt? In Sun Prairie. So let me see here. There we go. There it is. Can I get a round of applause for all of the poll workers and election volunteers that made sure that democracy could happen? And so here's the economic crisis. There we go. 160,000 boxes worth of breakfasts and lunches were delivered to help our students and our families eat throughout the economic crisis. Just within the last year, by our school nutrition department. Here are the actual pictures of our school nutrition department all coming around to try to make certain that the economic crisis that our families and our kids faced was not done so alone, and that they knew that they were supported by the Sun Prairie Area School District and people in this room, and not only through like something like this, but through access to daycare through our partners and through summer school and all of the unbelievable things that every single one of us decided to do to be a part of the solution. Can I get a round of applause for all of the school nutrition staff that did an unbelievable job serving our kids and families? Unbelievable job. And our racial awakening. None of this can happen without our students and our staff deciding to engage one another, to monitor ourselves for bias, by staying first person, local, and immediate, and by engaging continuously in anti-racist thoughts. And so can I get a round of applause for the people, for everybody that like dove into this this curriculum violence staff development that we all did together. Even the people new to this school district have now engaged in it. So please give yourself a round of applause for that. So we faced a ton, and I think what we learned is that all of those competing crises have a resolution, and it's through what each and every single one of us do. Moving into a world where we're all a part of the solution, and that opting out isn't an option, and that the only way around it is through it. And that what we can take away from that into this like new school year, the 2021-2022 school year, is that we can enter this school year understanding that we're all going to be a part of this solution. So I also want to acknowledge like the 21-22 school year is going to be a really interesting year. We're coming like out of a year of quarantines, out of a year of like stay-at-home orders, out of a year of like Zoom meetings and some isolation, and like into this year, this 2021-2022 school year, that's got a little bit of normalcy for all of us. And it's in preparation for the 2022-2023 school year, which will massively change the face of the school district. And so like the 2021-2022 school year is this interesting year of a return to normalcy in preparation for something to be different forever. And so it's just an interesting year. And so like this year is going to be a year of a number of ends. It's going to be an end of our current secondary configuration. It's going to be an end of like this one comprehensive high school, one high school academy type of a configuration. It's going to be the end of like how we understand like the Cardinals as being a part of the identity of this entire town and all 79 square miles. It's going to be the end of our secondary boundaries. It's going to be the end of an older building, PPA Academy, which previous to that was the junior high school. And that Schoolhouse Hill right there is a place where a public school in Sun Prairie has sat for hundreds of years. And that will go away soon. And it's the end of a strategic plan. And so the current strategic plan that I read all the time and I show up here and everything every year, it's like the end of that strategic plan. And so like I just also want to spend a little bit of time acknowledging the strategic plan, because the strategic plan, when we pull up what it meant a lot for this town, and I think it meant a lot for us, and it meant a lot for the school district. And so the background of the strategic plan is that in the 2012-2013 school year, in preparation for 13-14, the then board president, Tom Weber, put your hand up, Tom, along with the then superintendent, Tim Culver, went around and did 60 SWOT analyses. And then they engaged the community in this like almost 3-day type of an event to try to establish a new vision, a new purpose or mission, and a strategic plan for the school district. And so they went around and did a SWOT analysis, and then they had a like UW researcher come in and do a bit of a thematic analysis for all of the different elements, you know, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for that SWOT analysis. And so like this is the actual picture of some of the slides that the UW researcher gave to us. It's hard to see. There's a lot of information on there. So I'm going to just like sum it up here for you. All right. So like in the 2013-2014 school year, the state of this school district during that year was that our community was calling for more involvement with families. Now remember, back then, we're just coming out of that huge fight of the Common Core. None of our curriculum had been revised, and the instruction materials were older and hadn't been updated to what they were calling the Common Core at that time. There was no equity plan. Our communication was lacking. In fact, like literally, we didn't even have like a Facebook page at that time, the 2013-2014 school year. There was no long-range facilities plan. We're busing kids from each one of our 7 elementaries all over the place. And if you can remember, the bleachers had collapsed like that previous year at Ashley Field. And we were growing and had no way of understanding like what our future was at all at that point. We did not have a one-to-one technology plan at the time. People were calling for better quality and better service for school nutrition. We were at a complete lack of staff development, and especially aligned staff development to what we were trying to complete. We had a weak summer school program. There were secondary scheduling concerns. We had a lack of staff diversity. We were really struggling trying to figure out how to fund the school district. We had a lack of competitive pay for our educators across the system, and there was no capital maintenance plan for elementary schools. That's literally what kind of came up in the 13-14 school year. That was the state of what we were at then. And then we tried to like engage in this, like embark in this journey of like developing a strategic plan that everybody also had to do together. And so what they came up with, and this is an actual picture of it, is this strategic plan. And so it was just on an Excel spreadsheet. It was the picture of a house. And this is where our vision and mission. Now we've jazzed it up, and it's usually that pillared thing that I usually share, but this is the actual original picture of the strategic plan. So to be recognized as a high-performing school district of choice that reflects the cultures of our diverse community, and to inspire and prepare every child, every day, by providing relevant, engaging, and innovative learning experiences inside and outside the classroom. This is the document where all of that originates, where like our community came together to try to revise our vision and mission. And we decided to try to do 4 things really well in order to make progress, baby steps toward that vision and mission. We were going to support teaching and learning to an exceptional degree. We were going to try to engage and focus on our workforce to have amazing staff to be able to do it all. We were going to communicate and engage, and we were going to try to work toward having the facilities and the tight operations to fund it all. And that was our strategic plan. Now, The state of the school district as I stand before you right now, and we are not perfect, and we have made progress. Every single one of us have been engaged in making progress. So we have family engagement plans and community schools across this entire school district in response to that call for more engagement. More family engagement through all of the committees, and I'm talking secondary school space planning committee, elementary planning committee, elementary boundaries, secondary boundaries, our student behavior and bullying task force. We have had more family engagement literally in the last 5 years than I think this school district has ever had. We've designed, through the curriculum renewal and design plan, we have revised every single part of the curriculum across this entire district, and we have updated the instructional materials for every single grade level and subject area. The Sun Prairie Area School District, we have work to do, and this is my 15th year as a superintendent, and I'm here to say we're acknowledged in the state for leading the way. Our staff here leading the way in equity work, including Beyond Diversity and having E-teams at each one of the schools. Our Facebook page has 8,254 followers, and in the 2021 school year, when we reached out to parents through a survey, and this was a statistically significant survey, and this is because of your work being a part of the solution, parents told us to a degree of 84.5% that they were satisfied or very satisfied with the communication from last year, the 2020-2021 school year, with all those reopening plans, all of the things that we had to do together, all the shifts in mitigation, all of that stuff. And that's what our parents told us. Like they told you, you did a good job communicating with us. Thank you for taking care of our kids. We were satisfied with the communication. That is amazing, everybody in here. We have work to do. We are not perfect. I am imperfect. The decisions that we all tried to make to try to get through that pandemic were imperfect. And our parents are saying that we did a good job, and they're appreciative of our work. We've engaged in $253 million worth of capital referenda to construct 2 elementary schools, to reconfigure all of the boundaries, and then to also construct a second high school. That happened literally in the last 6 years. That's $250 million worth of work that we have done together. And the amount of engagement that we have had from staff in the designing of all of those schools is spectacular. That's something that we should all be unbelievably proud of in the last 6 years. We are leading the state in safety and security. We invested $5 million in our teacher compensation plan. Last year, we hit a 90% retention rate with our educators. We have a 1-to-1 technology program that includes Chromebooks and iPads and hotspots across the system that, although it was hard as compared to other districts, worked exceptionally well as we faced that pandemic. We served 160,000 breakfasts and lunches during the pandemic. Right now, we're leading the state through Eloy and all of the unbelievable work that she does with staff development. We have the largest summer school program in the state of Wisconsin. We have transitioned to secondary schedules that serve our students better. We have a Grow Your Own program, and it is not perfect. And in 2014, we were at a 9.3% overall diversity rate, and we are now at a 14.8% diversity rate within our staff. We passed $7.8 million worth of recurring referenda. Recurring referenda means that we don't have to go back to our population to have another election to ask for it again. It's permanently with us, which is super important to understand. Not many school districts have that. We have that, and it was in the last 6 years. And we have a capital maintenance program that is ripped out lockers, replaced flooring, replaced roofing, and updated heating and ventilation systems across our entire system. We have not done everything right, but we've done some stuff right here in the strategic plan. And I think it's just it's interesting to acknowledge how much progress we've made, and also to acknowledge that that strategic plan was something that reflected the needs in 2014 up until today, and it's also time to refresh it. So if you want more information about just some of the things that we've been able to accomplish with the strategic plan, we do have a web page where we've delineated out all of the different things. In each pillar, just as sort of like this resource for everybody to sort of scroll through and begin to understand what we've done together relative to the strategic plan. And you can look for more information about how we're going to try to refresh the strategic plan and better understand like what the next 5 years, what the next 6 years look for us, and what to focus on. And so please look for more information on that. Okay, so this year is this year of lasts in preparation for a year of firsts. And we have not done everything perfectly, but we have done stuff, we've done some stuff pretty well. And we also sort of understand that when we approach some of these crises and understand that when we are a part of the solution and look at ourselves, each and every one of us is a part of the solution, we can get through it. And so like, I showed this picture probably 2 convocations ago. It was in 2018, and I love this picture. The sun is literally rising over Sun Prairie as we look at like this school district sign. It's just sort of an inspirational, meaningful type of an image. And so at the beginning of this, I acknowledged that I felt like, and I think many people did, that we were like settling in on this edge of chaos and where every decision was imperfect. And also, I think we have to acknowledge in this year of lasts, in preparation for a year of firsts, that we're also settling in to this like new frontier of serving students through this vision of every child, every day. We will refresh our strategic plan. We will acknowledge the successes that we've had in the past. We will look at ourselves and try to like have that mind frame that every single one of us is a part of the solution. And to do so, if I can like express all of my emotions through emojis, by trying to like keep our sanity and give grace to one another and try to make sure that like we are all in this sense of like trying to get through this year of lasts and firsts, assuming positive intentions with every single one of us, and empathy for each other. And so like this year is this acknowledgement that we are coming out of a very difficult time for a year of normalcy. And because what we've done in the past, and because of what we've learned coming out of all of those 4 competing crises, that this year is going to be an amazing year. And it's because of all of you. So thank you for letting me just sort of share my thoughts this morning. I appreciate all of you. And the next thing that we are going to, so someone give me a wave if we're prepared for everything. Okay. And the next group that I'm going to welcome up should energize you more than what I just did. So, everybody ready? Please help me welcome the Penguin Project.
Just a small town girl living in a lonely world. She took the midnight train going anywhere.
Just a city boy, born and raised in South Detroit. He took the midnight train going anywhere.
gave room.
A smell of wine and cheap perfume. For a smile they can share the night. It goes on and on and on and on. Strangers waiting up and down the boulevard. Their shadows searching in the night. Streetlight people living just to find emotion, hiding somewhere in the working hard to get my fill. Everybody wants a thrill. Paying anything to roll the dice just one more time. Some win, some will lose. Someone to sing the blues. And the movie never ends. It goes on and on and on and on. Strangers waiting up and down the boulevard. Their shadows searching in the night. Streetlight people living just to find emotion, hiding somewhere in the Don't stop believing. Hold on to that feeling. Streetlight people. Don't stop believing. Hold on to that feeling. Streetlight people. Don't stop.
Okay, we've got a 15-minute bio break. There's snacks and water, and then also little notebooks out in the cafeteria. We have to be back here by 9 o'clock for Cornelius Minor. Okay? Take a break. Just make sure to be back at 9 o'clock for Cornelius Minor.
want to co-host, if you want me to drink the
It's like wonderful to be here with all of you. We are just hanging out. As you know, we'll be getting started in about 5 minutes. So now is the perfect time to say what's up to folks that you haven't seen in a while. If you are in person, get some water, some coffee, some tea if you need to do that. One of the things that I am really trying to normalize after the year that we've had is just that we take care of ourselves in every conceivable way. So I am just so excited to be here alongside you. Welcome to Jennifer and to Marcia. Welcome to John and to Ryan. It's fantastic to see you. Jennifer, I love your classroom already. Like, I am so into you right now. Like, like I love the window treatments.
Thank you.
Yes.
And he doesn't move on.
Oh, I'm the vibe is winning. All right, so Jennifer's got the vibe. So,
I have never seen this, like where they're in stereo.
oh yeah. Yeah, well, the Performing Arts Center has this where like they're highlighting speaker. It's probably I love it. Yeah, I finally broke down like late in the night and brought out a projector from my house. So we cleared one of the walls. So we took up all the paintings and photos. And so like one wall was like we could project on the wall. And that's how the kids did school, just because it's more entertaining that way. With like the projector on the wall. And so they had a huge cake where they would run the projector into my computer and they'd go, stereo. Welcome everybody. It's so great to see you all. We're really excited. As you come in, feel free to say what's up. You can stick on our chat and make sure that you've got your water, your tea, your coffee, whatever it is. And I'm just so excited to be starting alongside you. Welcome, Rebecca. It's so good to see you. So Rebecca, are you the AVID teacher?
I'm one of them, yes. Lisa is also one too.
I'm one of the AVID teachers, right? So you're my twin.
I think it's funny that he totally knew that you were the AVID teacher. You know? It's because of the same.
You're like, well, we all have the same gear, so like, so, yeah. Sometimes when I'm on the subway, I can spot the other AVID teachers. So then my kids will be like, how do you know that person? I'm like, I can tell from the AVID bag. So even though I've never met them, they're my brother, they're my sister.
Absolutely. We're a family, aren't we?
Yes. We'll be getting started momentarily. Thrilled to be here alongside you. getting started momentarily. The good folks at the Performing Arts Center are going to kick us off, so we'll just take a few moments to get ourselves ready. And it is just so exciting to be working alongside you today. I'm thrilled to be here. So last minute coffee, tea, water, all of those things are important. Thank you for just in advance for the immense contribution that you made to students. As I looked out on this crowd, it's really hard to believe that we're here again at the first phase. You know, and thinking through what it means to teach in this moment is what we get to do today. So we're going to be getting started momentarily, and this is such a thrill to be awesome. My name is Cornelius, and I'm joined here by my colleague Michelle. And once we get the word to go, we'll be getting started. So thank you.
I just got an email from Nancy Ellery, and apparently notebooks were purchased for everybody in class today when the session is from. So we just share that information. Yeah, it's good stuff. I hope I see him at some point, because I have never just emails.
I like so much more for that. Yeah,
We're going to take the seats.
It's just a little more time, really, a segue. I think people are streaming in. I can see the performances. I'll just leave it to you.
Yeah, so the folks in the Performing Arts Center are going to get to work, to go, but it's just so exciting again to see you all. I always appreciate getting to visit the area. Some more virtually so excited.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Cornelius is ready to begin, so if everyone could find their seats and give Cornelius your attention, please. Thank you.
We're thrilled to be working alongside you today. So we'll be getting started. We'll take our last 60 seconds. So as you make your way to your seats, to a comfortable spot in your house by your computer, please know that that, that it's been quite an eventful summer for so many of us. And so please prioritize your own comfort. So if there's water or anything that you need, please be sure to do those things. That we've got to make sure that we take extraordinary care as we come back into school. For what we know, in many ways, will be an eventful and uncertain year. So thank you for starting that year alongside me. I'm looking forward to getting started in about 60 seconds.
Cornelius, I just had this moment where I looked back and the first email I got from Aloy, she was planning this, was back in March of 2020. It feels like so long ago. So it is really good to see you all and to be here.
Yes, it is indeed. And with that, we will jump right in and get started now. I want to defer to anyone there in the Performing Arts Center who wanted to start with opening comments, or should I jump right in? We're good to go? And those in the Performing Arts Center, you can shoot me a thumbs up, all right, awesome. Well, I again am beyond honored and thrilled to be here alongside you. Now, I know this is less than ideal, that starting in this way where some of us are still remote and others of us are making our way back into buildings. These have been incredible times. And it is called for flexibility and innovation and creativity that has left us in many ways fatigued. And we brought that fatigue through the summer, and many of us, for the first time in our careers, are actually stepping onto the threshold of this new school year, feeling not quite rusted, right? And so how do we make our way into a school year when already the last 2 years have demanded so much of us? So today we get to explore that together, and I think one of the things that I can start with is the reality that in the work that we do, there are no easy answers, especially in times like right now. And so I am just so excited to be starting this alongside individuals that I have respected and admired and looked up to for so long. And today we get to explore what it means to start. And here's how I wanted to build today. I built today, of course, with lots of information to share. But one of the things that we know is that no great truths are found in monologue alone, right? And so though I'll be sharing, we know that me talking the whole time ain't quite going to get it for us. And so I've really thought lots about the kinds of reflection and thinking that we can do even in this hybrid way together. And so there will be times throughout our work today where I might ask you to pause and think, or to pause and journal, or even to pause and talk, or pause and chat in the chat box. And so there'll be moments where we'll be thinking together. And here's how I want to start. I'm actually going to jump right into things because we've got so much to consider in our work together today. Now, one of the things that I'm really sensitive to is that we've got limited time, that there are big concerns in this Zoom room, in this physical room about how we're going to get things going. There are people, and our checklists are all a mile long. You all are about 2.5 weeks ahead of me, so I won't be back at my first day for another 15 days or so, but we're all thinking about so much. And so I want to really make sure that today is a day that supports the thinking that you're already doing. And so today we're going to be studying really what it means to learn in partnership with children. That those words are words that we've uttered before, we've thought a lot about this, and as we turn this corner into the new school year, I really wanted to think about what it means to learn in partnership with children. And I'll unpack that word a lot throughout this time together, that our work cannot just be about being attentive to kids. With all of the demands on us, it's about being attentive to our own needs. And so true partnership will be pursuing what that can mean today. And I wanted to start with a bit of an introduction. Now, I've gotten a chance to know many of you, and for some, this is my first time at meeting you. And so as we think about studying together today, I realized that I wanted to kind of like frame our work today around like literally where I am coming from. I think it's really important to kind of get a bit of an orientation before we get to study together. For those of you who I'm meeting for the first time, I'm a 7th and 8th grade literacy coach from Brooklyn, New York. So I have spent my entire career in secondary, where I really work to support kids and teachers as they develop language throughout all of their subjects. I spend a lot of time in science and math and really thinking about what language needs emerge in science and math, in addition to the time that I spend in traditional language arts classes. But, you know, like so many of us, all of that was disrupted this last, 17 months by the pandemic that we've all experienced. Being a New Yorker, things have been particularly challenging here. And so the things and the comforts that I am used to, I've had to really spend the last 18 months figuring out how to exist alongside my family. And so that's, of course, my first priority. So though I think lots about language arts, I'm always thinking about my family. And so for the last 18 months, my kids have been engaged in remote learning. So you see pictured here on the left side, my partner, Cass, who is also an educator. She is a 9th grade educator now, coach, and so and we've got 2 wonderful kids, and so really thinking alongside our community about how to best move through this moment has been the defining thought of our last 18 months. I am an avid skateboarder. I coached the team here for many years, but even the things that I love have been disrupted by this pandemic. So we haven't had a skateboard team in about a year and a half, and so this fall we started up for the first time after about a year and a half away. And so much of what I do every day has been impacted by what we've all been experiencing. And because of that impact, I've really taken this moment to really think about what it means to advocate for children and for teachers in communities around the globe. So I've spent a lot of time in the last few months around the world, but like virtually, working alongside educators like you, working alongside like local and state governments, even thinking about what it can mean to change our policy to be more teacher-centered and kid-centered, working with organizations like the International Literacy Association or NBC or NPR. Like all of those have been important parts of my journey to this moment as we share and build together today. But here's an interesting thing. I don't want to start here. I actually want to start in a different place. I want to start with a bit of story, and I've been thinking lots about this recently. But I wanted to start on, as we think about new beginnings, as we think about starting this year, I want to take you back to my beginning. The photo that you see on the screen here is my very first day in education. This is the very first day of my career. And I actually want to start here. This is me in my senior year of college. So I came to this profession, like many of you, after wanting to be a teacher for a long time. And so in my senior year of college, this was when I started my student teaching. I was done with all of my courses, and so I spent my final year of college actually in a 2nd grade classroom. And so this was me September 1999. And this was my very first day in 2nd grade, and I was leaving my college campus on this day to go start what has now been a decently long career in education. I was so excited. I am a kid of a teacher, and so this was a proud moment for my mom. Though she wasn't here on this day, this was a proud moment. She woke me up early in the morning. She called me. I got breakfast. I left my dorm and met my friends outside. And when we snapped this picture together, one of the things that I'm proudest of, this is me at Florida A&M University. Again, this is my senior year, 1999. And Florida A&M University, I'm a proud graduate. Florida A&M University is known for many things. But I am proudest of the fact that Florida A&M University, this small, historically Black college in Northern Florida, is known as one of the top producers of Black teachers. Florida A&M graduates more Black educators than almost any other institution in our country. And so I am one of many in this very, very proud tradition of educators. And so this was me really realizing my life dream for the first time. And here's where I wanted to start here. And again, I want you to notice the detail, like, the tie. I'm the only one dressed up among my friends. Again, I'm off to start my professional life, and they are off to finish, their senior years on this September morning. And so I leave campus this morning, full of hope and expectation and excitement. And I make my way nervously to that second grade class, to start again this lifelong journey. And as I started this journey, I got news a few hours later, that my campus had been attacked. And so this is me, same morning, September 23rd, 1999. And on this morning that I was literally starting my journey into our profession, our campus was bombed by a white supremacist. You see here, this is the newspaper clipping from that morning. I was a student leader, and after getting the news on my pager, this is pre-cell phone, so after getting the news on my pager, I left my first day of work and rushed back to campus in search of friends and roommates to make sure that folks were safe. And I spent the rest of that day searching for friends and calling parents to really kind of help people feel calm and at ease after such a harrowing tragedy. And on this day, I grappled with so much, right? Questions of like, why would something like this happen to my campus? Why an event like this on a campus full of people who just want to grow up and read books with children, who just want to grow up and be educators? And as I grappled with that why, and as I considered the tragedy of this moment, I learned a really valuable lesson that I have walked throughout my career with. That as I really tried to make sense of this moment, I realized that as a student myself in this moment that I couldn't. But I was so lucky to have professors and friends and teachers who could help me to make sense of this moment. And as I paid attention to my mentors and my teachers and my professors, I realized that in this moment, I needed several things. As I watched my professors and teachers care for me, I learned the most valuable lesson that I have learned in this entire profession. I learned that our work is more than just lesson plans, classroom management, and assignments. That as I looked around my campus then, as I looked to my teachers for hope, for inspiration, for healing, there were three big things that I needed. In this difficult moment, I realized that I needed safety and security as a student. I needed ways to feel good about myself and about my community. And I needed tools to ensure that I could graduate and create a world better than the one that I was currently standing in. In that moment, I realized that I needed awareness and understanding. I needed space to process the world around me and to express my feelings in ways that made sense. I also needed, in that moment, ways to understand all of the people who might be experiencing that same world, but in different ways. I needed connection. I needed ways to connect what I was learning in class to the realities that I was seeing all around me. And I needed proximity. I needed proximity to people and to ideas who could affirm me. And I needed proximity to people and to ideas who could challenge me. And so as a student, finishing my own education, starting my journey into this profession, this lesson, these understandings have stayed with me throughout my career. And as we consider starting this year out of difficulty, I'm thinking about how these very lessons can apply to our right now. And so as I grappled with what it meant to be a member of a community that was digging itself out of tragedy, I learned so much that year. Again, that was school year 99. I graduated in 2000, and I moved back home to get my very own classroom in the fall of 2000. So fall of 2000, I get my very own classroom after taking all of those lessons with me from Florida. I now, as a young teacher, am starting my journey into the profession. And as a young teacher, as you all know, your first few years are incredibly hard. But after leaving Florida, I return to my city, and this happens. And on this morning, we are about to observe the 20th anniversary of this event, and thinking about all that has happened in the last few days of Afghanistan. As I was preparing this talk, my mind went back to that moment. And again, I was reminded that our work is more than just lesson plans and classroom management and assignments. That on this morning, as a very young teacher, like in many ways, I didn't know exactly how this profession would go. I didn't know everything that I needed to know, but here I find myself on this morning, new to the profession. And as I looked out at students on this morning, I saw a familiar look, that I realized that my students in 2001 needed the very same thing that I had needed just a couple of months earlier. That as I looked out at my students in this difficult moment, I realized that they needed safety and security, just like I did 2 years earlier. I realized that as I looked out at my students, they needed awareness and understanding. They needed connection, just like I did 2 short years earlier. And as we think about our work today, as we think about beginnings, I can't help but to make the connection. That as I, grappled with my newness, I was reminded again that kids need so much more than just our lesson plan. That we are not just thinking about content and ability and access today. We are thinking about all of those things in the context of a very complicated world. While our children today aren't dealing with the traumas of terrorism, they are dealing with the traumas of surviving and living through a deadly pandemic. And one of the things that we know is that these things, again, are really, really important in the context of our very complicated world. And here's the truth of our time together this morning, that the world is always going to be complicated. It might not be terrorism, it might not be a pandemic, but kids are always going to need these things: safety, security, awareness, and understanding, connection. And so as we work together today, one of the things that I want to start with is that we again know that these are the things that kids are going to need. And it's our work to deliver those things. But I want to pause right here in the very beginning to do some big thinking together. That as we make our way into this year, I've got 2 questions for you, and you can feel free to journal these questions. So I'll give you a few seconds just to jot these in a notebook and to really explore your thoughts. What are the things that you know that kids need as they make their way back this year? That again, I talked about safety and security, I talked about connection, but there's so much more that you know about your own students. And so as you consider the needs of your own students, beyond reading, science, math, music, physical education, what are the things that you know that kids are going to need as they make their way back this year? That rarely ever do we make the time and the space to consider those things. And so I want to use some of our time together today to make those very careful and intentional considerations. Also, as you think, most importantly, what are the things that you need as we make our way back this year? And so I want to pause just for a moment to give you about 90 seconds to do a little bit of thinking. Now, like students, we know that some of us think best with a pen in hand. Some of us think best on our devices. Some of us think best by talking to someone near us. Some of us think best by sitting in silence for a moment. And so however you think best, I've got 2 questions that I want you to begin to think about in 90 seconds. Now, of course, we're not going to get to the end of this thinking in 90 seconds. This is simply a catalyst that we will use to think our way through our time together this morning. And so again, what are the things that you know that your students need as they make their way back this year? Most importantly, what are the things that you need? I'm going to be quiet for about 90 seconds while you begin your thinking again. And your thinking can look any number of ways. We know that powerful thinking sometimes happens with a pen in hand. We know that powerful thinking sometimes happens with a device. We also know that powerful thinking sometimes happens in silence, or sometimes powerful thinking even happens in conversation with another person. So I'll give you 90 seconds to begin your thinking now. We've got about 20 seconds left. And as you think, these are questions that we will continue to grapple with throughout our time together this morning. Hopefully these will be questions that you continue to wrestle with as we make our way through this year. But I think it's really, really important to think, yes, typically each school year we're starting, thinking about our content and our curriculum. And so I am wanting to make intentional time to think about the unique needs that have emerged as a result of, our current global and national and state level and local complications. And one of the things that we know, again, is that the world will always be complicated. That it won't always be a pandemic, but we're always going to be thinking about how we help to usher kids through the challenges that might exist in our communities and how we help to prepare kids for the challenges that we know that they will face in their lives. And so that gets me to our organizing question for the day. That again, we know that children need educators and community members who work from this understanding that our world is complicated. And so our big organizing question for the day is, how do we create the kinds of learning experiences that consistently deliver like joy and excitement and engagement and growth? And so we get to think together about that today. And as we think about that today, I wanted to start with some really intentional thoughts around what it means to be an educator right now. That I realized that it would be completely irresponsible of me to talk to you today without acknowledging the huge weight that we are all carrying in this moment. That as I look around me here in New York City, as I look out into this auditorium and into your Zooms, I realize that all of us right now, in these very uncertain times, are being asked to do the things that we used to do pre-March 2020. But now, as we make our way through the second surge of this pandemic, I realize that we're being asked to do these things with less time and with fewer resources. And one reality that hits me squarely in the heart is the understanding that there is no one in this generation who has ever taught through a pandemic before. And so in many ways, we're doing what we do, you and me, with very little direction. And this is incredibly stressful. And here's what I am realizing. As I make my way through this moment, as I consider my own needs, as I think about the stress that I feel as we head back to school for this fall, I realize that we cannot pass this stress on to children and to young adults by doing to them what the world is doing to us as educators. And so I have been really thinking about how I solve this, how I work through this moment, understanding how heavy the weight that many of us carry is. And so there are three things that I want to hand you right now in the very beginning of our time together today. Three considerations that I am making actively and in public as I engage in teaching. I think it's important to acknowledge, first and foremost, that expecting kids this year to do the same amount of work that they have done in years past is a flawed expectation. That we can still have very high expectations of kids, but those expectations, as we make our way back into this year, do need to be humane and realistic and flexible. We know that learning is not a do your work transaction, right? That learning is not you show up to school, you turn in your assignment, I give you a grade, end of transaction. That's not what learning is. Those of us who have studied child development, we know, especially in these preteen to young adult years, that learning is not transactional. Rather, we know that learning is relational, and we get to act on that understanding. as we open this year and as we move our way through it. But another thing that I'm learning in very real ways that I want to name in the very beginning of our work together today is the reality that giving 100% of myself as an educator every day is not sustainable. I want to say that again. Giving 100% of myself every day is not sustainable. And we've all seen the news, right? I've been reading the newspaper, watching the news reports these last 2 weeks as our colleagues around the country go back. And the news all feels very toxic to me right now. It's oh, the teachers are going to give it all. The teachers are going to make every sacrifice. The teachers are going to come in on weekends. The teachers are going to stay late. The teachers are going to spend their own money. The teachers are going to post their Amazon list on Facebook. All of that feels way too heavy for me. And so one of the things that, again, I know is that giving 100% of myself every day is not sustainable for me. It's not sustainable for kids. And so right now, in the face of all of this toxic discourse, I am learning how to choose my effort and how to calculate how I'm going to invest my energy. That I am literally learning to ration my energy across each week. So much of my spring was spent doing that. And here's the thing, for those of you who know me, and I've worked alongside some of you, for those of you who know me, you know that I am a chronic overachiever. Like if there is a perfect score to be won from teaching, I want to win the perfect score, right? So I'm the kind of teacher, I want to have a perfect 10 school day on Monday. I just watched the Olympics. I know all about perfect 10s, right? So I want to go to school on Monday, have a perfect 10 Monday. I'm the kind of teacher who wants to show up again on Tuesday and have a perfect 10 Tuesday and have a perfect 10 Wednesday. But here's what I know. If I have a perfect 10 Monday, a perfect 10 Tuesday, a perfect 10 Wednesday, I'm dead by Friday. And no kid needs a teacher who is too fatigued to make it through the week. And so I've literally been thinking, alongside my wife and partner, I've been thinking, how do I ration my way through the week so that I can be as powerful as I can be for kids, right? And so what I have done, and I sit with my wife every Sunday evening at the dinner table, as we finished up this spring, I realized that, again, perfect 10s every day, perfect 10 Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that 50-point week is impossible. And so I would literally give myself 40 points to spend each week, right? And so again, if I have a perfect 10 Monday, that means that I might need to follow that up with a Tuesday that's a solid 7, or a Wednesday that's a 6 or a 9. And so literally planning my way through the week and how I'm going to invest my energy, at what levels am I going to move through each day this week. Now here's the thing, this kind of rationing is not lazy or irresponsible. Rather, we know that rationing is what responsible people do in extreme situations. I'm looking out on this room and I know that many of you here are history teachers. We think lots about the heroes on the American home front during World War II, right? So those women who went to work in factories, those women who kept victory gardens, those women who rationed materials and food, right? And here's what those women knew in the 1940s. Those women knew that rationing is an active investment in my future. That if I eat all my food or use all my materials on Tuesday, I ain't got nothing left for Friday, right? And so I'm thinking about our year in this same way. How do I move through the year in ways that are healthy, right? But then I'm also thinking about children and the methodologies that I employ to serve them. That we have learned a lot in remote learning. We learned a lot in hybrid learning last year, right? And so I'm thinking how I use the methodologies that speak to learning targets because I care about language, right? I care about language development. I care about writing growth. I care about reading growth, right? And so how do we use the kinds of methodologies that speak to learning targets and standards without undermining the very human needs that all of us have right now? And so these are 3 considerations that I'm making as I talk to you today. And I hope that these are 3 considerations that you hold on to as we work through the beginning of the year. That we need to understand again that we can't invest all our energy, understanding that we can have a different kind of expectations for kids, and understanding that we can invest in methodologies that cultivate standards-based growth, but also that speak to the very human needs that kids have right now. And so as we think about what it can mean to do this work, I want to hand you a document that I've been thinking about, or a framework that I've been using. One of the things that I know is that in some very real ways, we are planning for the uncertain. So as we sit in our seats right now, as we consider what our work will be next week, as we consider what it means to meet students and engage students soon, right? Even though there are things that are certain, there is still so much that is uncertain. And I get a lot of anxiety when I am planning and facing the uncertain. So I've had to really think, Cornelius, how do you prepare yourself this year for the uncertain? And so there are four considerations that I've made in my own work as I am thinking about the uncertainty in the days ahead. You know, there's lots that we have organized, but we all know that there's lots that might change. And so as I position myself to be as healthy as I can be this year, there are four things that I'm considering. Of course, I'm considering my own energy and capacity, like we just mentioned. I'm considering also the reality that there are community members, students in our schools who have only known our school communities in times of struggle. And so I'm having to invest a lot now in planning for how I'm going to cultivate a sense of belonging for when kids get back, how I'm going to cultivate a way to repatriate kids back to the school community. Here's the reality. I shared with you all that I'm a 7th and 8th grade literacy coach. And so here's what I know about the 8th graders coming back into our school buildings for the first time this fall. That the 8th graders who are returning to me this fall left traditional school as 6th graders. And so I'm going to be welcoming back 8th graders whose 6th grade year was interrupted by this pandemic. And so there will be 8th graders with me in 2.5 weeks who still don't know how to open their lockers, who still don't know how to make it to the cafeteria downstairs, who still don't understand the protocol for gym, right? And so creating that sense of welcoming, creating that sense of belonging is going to be really important because so many kids' time with us have been interrupted as we have navigated tragedy and hardship, as we have navigated difficulty, as we have navigated uncertainty. Also, I'm planning when thinking about, the uncertain days ahead, I'm also thinking lots about curriculum and learning outcomes. Again, I'm a language person. Many of you are language folks. We've got math folks. We've got science folks in the room. We've got folks who are invested in the arts. This is a beautiful, beautiful gathering. And as I think about curriculum and learning outcomes this year, one of the things that I'm holding close to my heart is the reality that this is not a game of catch up. That what we are doing this fall is not about addressing learning loss. We know that learning loss is a myth, right? That these are fiction. That we know that just because the doors of our institutions were closed for short periods of time, we know that learning does not cease. Learning is part of the human condition. So we all witnessed in our community kids who were engaged actively in learning how to care for their families, kids who were engaged actively in securing resources for their younger siblings, kids who were engaged actively in supporting one another or creating solutions to problems that emerged in their households or in their classes or in community. Right? And so while kids might not have learned the lessons related to language or learned the lessons related to math or the lessons related to history or to science or to arts that we have prepared for them, kids engage in a lot of learning that is going to serve them as we move forward. And so our work in terms of curriculum is about doing the work that Grant Wiggins and Jay McTee outlined in their groundbreaking book, Understanding by Design. It's about identifying where kids are right now and then establishing a plan to move them forward. That our work is movement, right? So how do we get a sense of where kids are? How do we assess and learn about kids in powerful ways? And then how do we respond in ways that are developmentally appropriate and sound for our moment right now? But then also as we plan, one of the things that I want to invite you to consider, again, as we consider our own energy and capacity, as we consider cultivating a sense of belonging, and as we consider creating healthy learning outcomes, I think it's also important to consider the reality that there will be surprises on our path this year. We know that life happens. Our employers are going to make important demands. Our own families are going to need us. Things are going to come out of nowhere, right? And so one of the things that I'm doing right now, before I see students for the first time, is I am making a plan. What's going to happen when something happens that surprises me? What will be my response, right? And so one of the things that I'm doing right now is I am not planning every minute of my time. I am leaving open space in every agenda that I curate for my team to address whatever surprises come up in that moment. And so we don't know exactly what the surprises will be, but we can position ourselves right now for the understanding that there are still too many big questions and uncertainties out there, and we can plan space and time. We can plan energy for how we're going to address those big surprises. And so this has been a framework for my thinking this fall, and I wanted to hand this to you as a way to think about how we best serve kids in this moment. That I have really been thinking about what are the priorities that we can bring into our work this moment. I actually just had this conversation the other week with my team as we think about what our fall is going to look like. And so we sat together on Zoom and really kind of plotted out what will be the priorities that we champion this year. For us, and again, these priorities don't have to be yours, but for us, student and teacher well-being was paramount for us. Academic growth felt really important, right? Community stability, that there were so many new things last year. And so forming a sense of stability this year feels really important to us. Being responsive, innovating, and then taking care of each other. Like all of these things feel so important. And as we make priorities, it's important to consider that they are just that, they're priorities. And that means that we know, and I sat with my team a few weeks ago and we discussed this, that means that these 6 things are important to us. And you might have a different 6 things that it's important to you, but it's important to be really public about these conversations now, to sit with colleagues and friends and to say, what are our priorities for music? What are our priorities for art, for physical education, for science, for math, for reading, for writing? What are our priorities? And it's important to be public about those. And here's why. That as my team and I laid out our priorities, we also had to build an understanding that, again, there's too much uncertain about this year. So there might be some surprises. And if surprises happen and things get busy, we understand that we might have to drop a priority, right? So we understand, so by prioritizing, by putting these things in order, what we said as a team is if things get busy and we have to drop a priority, number 6 is going to be the first thing to go. But we built this list of priorities with that understanding right now, that if things get busy, we'll drop number 6 because we'll need to pivot to other things, right? And then we made a commitment to each other. If things actually get very busy, we'll drop number 5 and 6, right? So already at this point in the year, we know how we're going to respond when things get busy. We even joked with each other. We had a very real conversation that there was a moment this last school year where things felt impossible for us. That very rarely in my career am I at a place where I have no answers for anything. And there were several of those moments this year. And so one of the things that we said to each other as a team, again, before kids even show up, we were like, there are going to be impossible moments this year. There are 7 impossible moments that I can remember off the top of my head from last year, right? There will be impossible moments again. And when we are staring at impossibility, we made a commitment to each other as a team right now. Before kids even come, we're like, you know what? If things get impossible, that means we're dropping priorities 3, 4, 5, and 6. 1 and 2 are our top priorities. We're always going to invest in those 2 things. But if things feel impossible and we can't make our way out, priorities 3 through 6 got to go. Right? And so already beginning to have those conversations, because here's what we do in education so well. We do such a great job of adding to our load. We don't do such a good job of relieving that load. And so planning for that this year is, for me and my team, it feels like a must. And so these things I'm sharing with you so that, again, we can make our way into this year to serve kids in a powerful and healthy way. I'm reminded over and over again of the wisdom of our elders. My grandmother told me all the time, Cornelius, you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? And so making sure that we have enough to serve our students, this has been really, really powerful for me. And so before I pause to have you do a little bit of thinking here, here's what I want to do. I want to give you a moment to reflect on everything that I've shared, because I'm now going to pivot into thinking about how we then take all of this energy that we've thought about preparing ourselves and how we engage in the actual work of serving students. So I want to kind of do a small pivot to be more now kind of student facing. I've really thought a lot about how we're thinking about each other, how we're thinking about our own support. And so I want to give you a moment to reflect on some of the things that we've shared so far this moment. And so I'm going to invite you to 3 minutes of reflection now. So I'm going to invite you to 3 minutes of reflection. I've got my stopwatch with me here. And of course, I've got a few questions that I want to ask you to consider in our reflection. Now, we know that thinking, again, happens in lots of different ways. And so some of you are going to reflect by writing in your notebook. Some of you are going to reflect by talking to someone near you. Others of you are going to reflect by, sitting in silence for a while. Some of you are going to reflect by pacing or sketching. We know that thinking looks different depending on who we are. And so here are 3 questions that I want you to consider about our work so far this morning, that I would love for you to think alongside me, what's being confirmed for you this moment? So what are the big thoughts that I'm sharing that are emerging for you where you're like, yep, this is what I thought. These are the things that I've been feeling. These are the things that I've been thinking. What's been confirmed for you this morning? My second question for you is, what new ideas or thoughts are emerging for you? So what are the new things that are coming up for you? What are the things that you might not have considered? What are the things you're like, oh, I forgot about that? What are your new things? And then, of course, what persisting questions do you have? So what questions are coming up for you? And so again, I want to give you 3 minutes just to do a little bit of reflection. That reflection does not have to be silent. We know that people think best in any number of ways. So if you need to talk to someone near you, that is appropriate. If you need to sit in your own silence, that too is appropriate. If you need to write or draw or sketch or move, all of those things are appropriate. So I've got my timer stopwatch here. So I'm going to give us 3 minutes just to consider these things. After our consideration, we're going to come back together and chat for a bit, and then we will take our quick break. Again, it's just about halftime, and I'm a big believer that we don't keep people tethered to screens for longer than an hour at a time. So maybe 3 minutes to consider. We're going to come back together. We're going to chat. We'll have a quick break, and then we'll come back for the second half of our work today. So again, 3 minutes right now. We're going to come back together and talk, and then we'll have a longer break in a moment. So 3 minutes of just quiet reflection, or conversational reflection, or notebook-based, movement-based reflection. You may begin now. We've got about 30 seconds left. So as you make your way through your thinking, please know that this is not the end of thinking, but we've got about 30 seconds left in this short period of time to do a bit of reflection. All right, I want to welcome us back together. And you've got a chance to, again, start some thinking. And again, I understand that thinking is longitudinal, so 3 minutes is never enough time to do an incredible amount of thinking, but you've started your journey of thought. And I wanted to pause this moment because I set our work up today in two hemispheres. So this first part of our work this morning has really been thinking about how we best position ourselves. What are the priorities that we established and how we best position ourselves to serve students powerfully? What are the considerations that we need to make? And so in a moment, we're going to have a bit of a break, and then we're going to pivot to think about then how do we best serve students, right? We've thought about how we best position ourselves, and then we get to think in our second hour together about how we best serve students. But before we make that transition, before we break, here's one of the things that I wanted to do. I wanted to pause to consider the thoughts that are emerging for you. And so again, we had 3 questions that we just reflected on. So we were thinking together, what are the things that have been confirmed? We were thinking, what new ideas or thoughts are emerging for you? And then we were really thinking about questions that we had. So I want to invite you right now to think alongside me. And so here's what that means. That means that you can share some of your thinking with me in the chat. That means that you can, approach the mic if you're comfortable doing so, unmute and share some of your thinking that way. Or you can, share with the designee in the room and have them share with me. But I want to just take a quick pause here to honor some of the thinking that you have been doing. So what has been confirmed for you so far this morning? What new ideas are emerging? What questions do you have? You can unmute, you can share in the chat, you can, approach the microphone, you can hand your comments or ideas to a designee and have them share. But I want to just take a moment to recognize the kinds of things that you are thinking right now. So I'll pause, just give us a little bit of time to share. Then out of this, we'll move into our first break. Absolutely, and I've got an eye in the chat, and so definitely what's being confirmed, the importance of self-care, and not just self-care, the cliche, right? That self-care has become cliche, where everybody says self-care, self-care, but like actually making the time for it. And so that part where I talked about planning for surprises, for example, that's one way that we prioritize self-care, that I don't know what the surprises are going to be, but in every agenda that I've made for the fall, I have set aside 20 minutes for, we don't know what new thing is going to come and surprise us, but something might. And so in each agenda that I have with my team this fall, there are 20 minutes set aside for that time so that we're not always stressed out about surprises. So Katie, I absolutely love what you have shared here. Leah's idea that students need to feel connected and safe, so powerful, right? And we'll continue to talk about how we cultivate that safety in our second hour. So this first hour has really been how we construct that safety for ourselves. In our second hour, we get to think about how students construct that safety. The idea of setting boundaries, Christina, you are my sister. Yes, setting boundaries has been really, really important, but that's something that I've consistently failed to do. And so I, at this stage in my career, am really learning how to do that in very public ways, in ways that are very clear and public. That's huge. Lisa, I appreciate that. Yeah, rationing ourselves for the week. Yeah, and Chelsea and Rebecca, thank you so much for sharing. So many powerful things coming up. So here's what we're going to do for now. Right now, it is 55 after the hour. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break. So we'll come back together at 05. It's 55 after the hour. We'll come back together at 05 to do the second component of our time together today. But I wanted to thank you for your time so far this morning. If anyone needs anything during the break, for the first 5 minutes of the break, I'll be right here. So you can certainly ask a question, and I'll be here to support you in that way. But we'll be all back together at 5 after the hour. I'll see you all shortly. Sure, performing arts center. Yep, you can ask them. Yeah. I love it. The Wu-Tang shirt. Yep. So I am a huge Wu-Tang fan. Yeah, like my favorite project is, like Enter the 36 Chambers. Like it doesn't get more classic than that first album. That'd be really easy. But I'm also just like Ghostface's first project, Iron Man, like hit me at a really important time in my life. So that's such an important project. I am a huge fan of ODB, being a Brooklyn person. So like, there's so many small projects. Small, like minor kind of claim to fame. I've gotten a chance to work with Jizza on a couple of math and science projects. That he is really involved with science education here in the city. And so have gotten a chance to connect with him over a few math and science projects. And I got a chance to go down to Staten Island and do some work with a group that Method Man was funding down there with a group of young people around writing. And so there's so many just like powerful like imprints that those like gentlemen have made on this community. So yeah, so that's really exciting. And then the action figures. Like right now, and I try to switch it up. I haven't been as great at switching it up during the summer, but during the school year, I would always switch up the background and have different things in the background for kids to take a look at. Like we knew that we wanted to have print-rich and visually stimulating classrooms, and so when I had to kind of like invent my Zoom closet, I wanted to have a print-rich and visually stimulating Zoom closet. And so, so the action figures behind me right now are Kofi Kingston from WWE, so the very first African-born WWE World Champion. I am Liberian. Kofi is from Ghana, but I grew up in Liberia. And so when Kofi won the World Championship about 2 years ago during Kofi Mania, that was a hugely inspirational moment for me and for so many young people. And so Kofi Kingston, action figure, WWE. I have Storm of the X-Men. Storm, again, African warrior goddess Storm. I have Miles Morales from Brooklyn. So Spanish-speaking mixed race Miles Morales from Brooklyn, and then Miss Marvel. I've been thinking lots about the kinds of texts that we share with kids, and so yeah, so lots of action figures. I'll switch it up. So one of my claims to fame, and I think Michelle knows this about me. One of my claims to fame is my degree is in literature. So I have a degree in literature, and English teacher, and of course when I was finishing up my master's studies, we could research any aspect of literature, and so my research was specifically on comic books in popular culture and really looking at discursive patterns in comic books. And I was particularly interested in Afrofuturism, so really taking a look at the presence of Black folks in an imagined future is my literary background. And so everything from the Jetsons to X-Men to Back to the Future. So that's my background. Yeah. Yep, you're so right. Legend of Liquid Sword, so slept on. Like, I mean, everything about Jizza, like everything, like it's so special. Yeah. Yeah. One of my prized possessions is I have an original vinyl printing of the original Liquid Sword, and here's an interesting connection between the two things I just cited. If you the image on the Liquid Swords album was drawn by a guy named Dwayne McDuffie and Denny's Cohen. Dwayne McDuffie and Denny's Cohen were the founders of a comic book company called Milestone, which they were two Black creators who left Marvel and DC respectively to form their own imprint. And so they had a really powerful imprint in the early 90s, and they illustrated the cover of Liquid Swords. So Milestone, as a comic book company, just returned this summer, and one of their artists who worked for that company is a guy named Jamal Igle, and Jamal Igle drew the cover of my book. So that's a connection that I have to Wu-Tang, to comic book culture. So yeah. Awesome. Well, it's great to see you all in the auditorium here. So enjoy the rest of your break. I'm gonna get some water. Yes, yes. Michelle, is there anything you need?
All set.
Awesome. We'll see everybody at 05. right, well, welcome back. We've got about 60 seconds left. So I'm a big believer in giving people their full break, and so we'll be coming back together in about 1 minute. All right, so I think this is all of us. I think we're back. Please know that I am prioritizing your care and I'm prioritizing your comfort in this moment. That again, we are making our way back to school in really delicate times. And so if you've got to move around, if you've got to get a drink of water, take a bio break, please know that you can go ahead and do that. I think one of the things that I am always trying to model as a great team leader is just that we can care for each other, as we all engage in this work together. And so thank you again for being here. Welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Please know that I understand that thinking is a process, right? And so though we've created some small pockets of time to think together, please know that you're going to have ideas that emerge, that hit you, that you have questions about. I know that those, my friends in the auditorium, you all have a microphone there in the auditorium. So anytime if you've got a question, please just step to the mic. Don't feel shy or bashful about interrupting. That I'm here for you, right? Like this exists because I care about you, and this exists because we all want to have a really powerful start. Those of you who are at home, you can feel free to unmute, you can feel free to hit us in the chat. But I think it's really, really important that I leave you today with lots to think about, and that I want to make sure that all of your questions are answered as we work together today. And so here's where I'd like to go. In our first hemisphere of our work together today, we really thought a lot about how do we best position ourselves as educators to serve kids powerfully. And in the second part, I really want to think about that actual service to children. What does that go like now that we're all back together? Now, one of the things that I got a chance to do was I got a chance to really think alongside some of you and to think about the things that you have been studying and the ways that you have been growing. And so I know a lot about the things that you all care about and the values that you work with. And so I want to actually start at our values, because as we think about what it means to serve kids in this moment, it's not too far away from the values that you all have always held in this community. And so I want to start with just some things that feel really important to name as we start our work together. Is when we're thinking about kids, you all have said over and over and over again, and so I really just want to remind us is that here we believe in human-centered care. You all have made tradition out of putting people, children, before policy every time. And so I'm just reminding us of the things that are already so important in this community. You all also have worked from the understanding there that no one learns from just listening to their teacher talk. We know that gathering kids in a room and talking at them is not an ideal way to learn. We know that children learn best, young people learn best when they have multiple opportunities to practice. And so as we make our way back to school this year, a lot of the learning that kids have to do, especially as they learn through the traumas of the last year that they have lived, a lot of that learning has to be experiential. So always asking the question, like, how do I teach and allow kids to practice the things that we're working on, right? We also know that kids express their knowing in different ways, and that all of those ways are valuable. So that means that the child who writes a 5-paragraph essay to elaborate on their thinking is not more capable than the kid who sketches a diagram or the kid who builds a model. And we can work and lead in ways that acknowledge this. That again, kids express their knowing in different ways. And if we're truly committed to diversity and to the inclusion of all kids, that means that we build and create structures that allow us to see the genius in the different ways that kids can communicate. That if the only way to express your genius is through writing, then I miss out on all the kids who express that genius through speaking. If the only way to express your genius is through speaking, then I miss out on all the kids who need to build a scientific model, or miss out on all the kids who need to make a diagram, right? Also, we know in this community that flexibility and creativity and innovation must continue to define our work, now more so than ever. And what that means is if flexibility and creativity and innovation define our work, then we are not leaning into fidelity to programs or to rules or to long established ways of doing things that might not serve us as powerfully right now. And so we're always thinking with our students in mind, what is going to serve us most powerfully in this moment? That means we're allowed to abandon yesterday's thinking if it does not serve today's needs. Finally, meeting kids matters. That it's been said so many times in this community that we care about meeting kids. And so meeting kids matters. This means that in this community, we center the kids who have been most marginalized by school, right? And so that means in our quest to meet kids, not all kids will get the same thing. And that's totally okay. That when we think about what equity is each kid getting the things that they need so that they can thrive and be successful in our community. And so I just wanted to remind us of these values, and we can really work from this place. Now, the question comes up often for me, and I want to be really intentional here to really kind of draw a really clear line between our values and what we do every day. That people all the time ask me, well, Cornelius, if these are our values, how does this connect, to the work that we do every day? We've got this commitment to kids. So how does this commitment show up in the work that we get to do, and then how can we do the work, And one of the things that I've often said is that, after seeing an attack or hearing hurtful language, it's really easy to see and to understand the potential for harm that can exist in some communities, right? But seeing the potential for harm in our own schools is not as easy for some people. And so I want to really break it down here. That one of the things that I'm always thinking about is how do we serve in student-centered ways? How do we work in student-centered ways? We talked in our first hour about how we make sure that we're working in ways that center our own humanity, but now we're talking about kids. And one of the things that often happens is it's really hard to see the problems or the challenges in our service to children. And one of the things that we know, my grandmother used to remind me of this wisdom all the time, is that if we can't see a problem, we can't fix it, right? And so I've drawn this pyramid here for you to really illustrate some of the ways that harm can creep into our school communities. That one of the things that happens most often, and I'm talking about my own work here too, right? As I mature in the profession, I am always thinking about ways that I can get better. And as I examine my own work, one of the things that I know is that some approaches that we take to teaching do not authentically see all children, right? And often we take these approaches to teaching because of tradition, right? We say things like, well, this is how math is supposed to be done, or this is how we've always done language arts, or this is how music just goes, right? And so instead of thinking sometimes about how we remix or bend curriculum toward kids, what often happens in school communities is we demand that the kids conform to us. And I want to go ahead and name right here that this is not okay. We're gathered today to really think about what it means to work in partnership with children. And so that means asking ourselves the question always, is this the best way to meet the needs of the learners that are assembled before me? I don't have to be wed to tradition. I don't have to be wed to how it's always been done. But what's most often happened in many, many school communities, including in mine, is sometimes what happens is we demand that kids conform to us. And this isn't okay. Now here's the thing. Children also know that this isn't okay. Now, no kid ever is going to write me the well-worded email that says, "Dear Mr. Minor, the way that you have constructed this learning experience does not meet my needs as learner." Like, no kid is going to send us that email, or I wish a kid would send us that email, right? Rather, instead of getting the clear communication, dear Mr. Minor, again, the way that you've constructed this learning experience does not work for me as a learner. Rather what we see is we see this in their behavior. We see it in their growth. We see it in their engagement or in their lack thereof. And what often happens, unfortunately, in school communities is sometimes we read this behavior, right? And the great Carla Shalaby, who wrote the book Troublemakers, reminds us that in school, behavior is a form of communication, right? And so we often read this communication and we label it as deficiency. We label it as defiance. And we use this to sometimes label and to sort and to segregate kids. And so what ends up happening in some school communities, what's happened in my own work that I am really working to grow past as I talk to you, is sometimes in school communities, we treat kids as if they are broken. So conversations at school, if you look at this third level of the pyramid, conversations at school become all about fixing the bad kids. And so instead of reflecting inward, blame gets shifted to children and to communities. And so here is the big question that I want to grapple with in this second half of our morning together. Here's the big thing that I want to think with you about. That this work, this trend that I am describing in this pyramid, unfortunately happens disproportionately to multilingual children and to children with learning disabilities. And it happens to kids from groups that have been historically marginalized in institutions like school. And this leads to less learning, which connects to so many other success indicators at school. And so ultimately what happens is that kids have fewer opportunities in life because of how school has historically been done. And so one big question that I ask myself, and this will be the question that governs the rest of our time together today, if the ways that school operates have historically harmed some people, then we can reimagine what it means to do school. I want to say this again. If the ways that school operates have historically harmed some people, or have historically left some people out, then we can reimagine what it means to do school. And so I want to spend the rest of our time thinking about what that can look like. But before I move on, I just want to give 60 seconds just to allow for this to sink in. So I'm just going to leave this screen up, and I just want to give you 60 seconds to sit and just some quiet reflection to think about this, that I'm making a very intentional connection here to like the structures and the realities that we build in school to the outcomes that kids experience. That if we say that kids are our learning partners, if we say that we are student-centered, then that means that we've got to be willing to look at the things that we have built for students and ask ourselves the question, does this thing reach all students, or is it only reaching some students, right? And so I want to just give us a moment to sit with this for a while. All right, I know this is a lot to share, but I want to pivot into like, okay, so what can this look like if we operationalize this knowing, right? So what can this look like? And so again, our question always, how are we as school personnel working to make school a more accessible place for all learners? You know, that this is work that we get to do together. And so I want to really spend the rest of our time talking about some just very concrete ways that we can get this done together. I want to start with what it can mean to be back at school. That I think it's important to acknowledge that school culture is not a single thing, right? And so as we're welcoming kids back to school this year, one of the things that often happens when we're planning for young adults and teens is that we often think about this thing called school culture or classroom and community culture, right? And that I want to just complicate our thinking about school culture. As we welcome kids back, it's important to note that school culture is not a single thing. It's actually a lot of things, and it's dynamic, right? And so as we work to rebuild school culture, a couple of considerations are really important. And I'm just handing these to you so that you can think about how these might play out in your room or in your work or in your relationships with kids. So we know that children can be reminded how to do school, that this is really important in this moment as kids make their way back into fall after an experience that was interrupted by pandemic last year. Reminding kids of the ways that we do school is really important. Now, I want to just note the particular difficulty of this because in many ways, we're still learning how to do pandemic era school, right? And so we are building this culture while we're still learning about it at the same time. And so I just want to acknowledge that difficulty. But as we remind kids how to do school, and I cannot overstate this enough, that this teaching has to be, of course, like thorough, that we want to be consistent, but also we've got to be loving and fun and affirming. I can only talk about my own existence. One of the things I know is that when I am stressed out about rebuilding community, one of the things that can happen is sometimes my lessons to kids and how to do school can feel abrasive. And we cannot do that this year. The kids have been through too much. And so I'm thinking, how do I rebuild school community? How do I remind kids of how to do school in the midst of me learning how to do this kind of school in ways that are loving and fun and affirming? Here are some things that I've had to consider in that journey. Again, how can we do school in ways that are loving and fun and affirming? Some things that I've had to consider. The reality that in many ways, pandemic era school culture has already defined itself. For those of you in the room who think about child development, you know that one response that kids have to hardship, one response that kids have to difficulty or to inconsistency is that kids seek survival. So when we study young people, specifically preteens, teens, and young adults, one response that this age group has to difficulty is they seek survival on the one hand, and they seek pleasure on the other hand. So when young adults are confronted with difficulty, they seek one of two things, sometimes both at the same time. They seek survival. What do I have to do to survive this hardship or this inconsistency or this new situation? And then what do I have to do to ensure my own pleasure, right? And so one of the ways that kids have responded to pandemic life, or the way that young kids have responded to pandemic life, is either through survival or pleasure. And you've probably seen that even in the work that you did with kids last year. So many of you might remember last spring and last winter, the kids that we're used to, the kids who go above and beyond, the kids who always try hard, the kids who always do the extra credit, you probably noticed that those kids were not focused on thriving last year. Those kids were simply focused on doing the bare minimum, survival, right? And that's not because they're lazy, that's not because they're bad, it's because it's what humans do when things feel stressful. And so that ethos of survival, we're still gonna see that this fall. So we're so used to demanding excellence. And one of the things that's going to happen is kids in a crisis do not respond with excellence. Kids in a crisis respond with survival. And so there's a lot of survival thinking that we're going to see. And so part of our work this fall is helping kids to grow from that place of survival back into that place of thriving. Now, here's the thing. Often when we talk about welcoming kids back to the school year, people are like, oh, well, here's what I'm going to do for the first week of school and the second week of school. This growth, this movement is not a 1 or 2 week thing. Growing kids from survival back to being able to thrive is going to be the story of our year this year. And so we've got to be really patient with kids. When kids opt out of excellence and opt into simply surviving, that is not them being defiant or mean-spirited. Rather, that is them still negotiating the lingering impacts of this pandemic. Another thing that we know from studying youth culture and child development is we know that some kids respond to tragedy, some kids respond to hardship or inconsistency by prioritizing pleasure. And we've all met kids who do that, right? When things feel serious and grave and new and intense and difficult, some kids laugh inappropriately. Some kids tell jokes. some kids play games when they shouldn't be. It's not because they're being dismissive or mean-spirited. Rather, that is a very human response to hardship, right? And so one of the things that you can count on experiencing this fall is there are going to be inappropriate jokes. There are going to be times where kids are talking out of turn. There are going to be times when kids are engaged in playing games when you need them to be serious. And again, what we know in moments like this one, this is not kids attempting maliciously to undermine your authority. Rather, this is kids negotiating the uncertainty of this moment by prioritizing their own pleasure. Now, here's the thing. Again, our work is undoing these things, but these things cannot be undone overnight. And so walking into this school year with an understanding that some of the kids are going to be out of line because they're prioritizing pleasure over productivity. Some of the kids are going to rub me the wrong way because they're prioritizing survival over thriving and exceeding. This is not kids being bad. Rather, this is kids being kids. And so a big part of what we mean when we say meeting kids where they are is understanding that we're going to meet them here in August and September, and we still got to meet them here in December when they're still grappling with what it means to be back in school after times like we've had. One of the things that we also know is that there are several conversations about engagement, right? We talk all the time about how we best engage kids, and kids get these labels. Oh, this kid is engaged in science. This kid is disengaged from math. This kid is engaged in art. This kid is disengaged in language arts, right? Kids get these labels. And one of the things that I want to demystify here today is that when kids are unsure, like they are right now, they tend to choose silence. And sometimes we as adults misread that silence. And so I want to unpack this for you a bit. Again, when kids are unsure, they tend to choose silence or distraction, right? And so this is not them divesting from class or being disengaged. So here's what happens. If a kid typically reads a social situation, right? And so so let's say a kid walks into a 9th grade homeroom and the teacher asks a question. What happens, and here's the intellectual labor that kid is doing in that moment. That kid is reading the entire classroom. That kid looks around the room and they say, who else is in this room? If I answer this question, what is my social risk? If I answer this question and I get it wrong, who's going to see me? If I answer this question and get it wrong, someone here might not sit next to me during lunch, or someone here might think I am less cool than my peers. If I answer this question and get it right, I run the risk of earning maybe an undesirable label. And so kids are reading the entire social ecosystem of a room, right? When they are choosing to participate or not. And so here's what a 9th grader, a 7th grader, a 6th grader, a 12th grader is thinking right now. That the risk of potentially answering a question wrong and becoming a pariah in my community, the risk of answering a question wrong and having a friend make fun of me is too great a risk than I am willing to take right now. So instead of taking that risk, I will opt into silence because silence is less socially risky in this moment. Or instead of taking that risk, I will opt into creating a distraction because creating a distraction is less risky than answering a question wrong. And so sometimes we see these kids who opt into silence or who opt into distraction, and we give them the label. We say, this kid is disengaged. And actually, I am arguing the exact opposite. The kids who opt into silence are actually not disengaged at all. That some of those children are actually very engaged. They're so engaged that they read the whole social ecosystem of the room. They are so engaged that they were able to calculate the potential social risk of getting a question wrong. They are so engaged that they were able to figure out that in this case, silence is more socially advantageous than potentially getting a question wrong. And so really learning how to take their pandemic era engagement and to begin to create the kinds of safety that allow them to show up is our work this fall. So I want to pause here again because I'm sharing a lot. So I want to give you an opportunity to do just a little bit of thinking and reflection. And so I want to ask you the same three reflective questions that I asked you before. What's being confirmed for you so far? What is beginning to change? What new ideas are coming for you? And then what questions are emerging for you? So I want to give you 60 seconds just to think through, talk through, pace through those questions. Again, we know that thinking can look any number of ways. So thinking can be writing, thinking can be pacing, thinking can be chatting. I want to give you 60 seconds to begin just to kind of revisit those things. So what's been confirmed for you so far today? What is shifting? What big questions do you have? I want to give you 60 seconds just to begin that thinking, and then we'll come back together to think some more about how we deliver powerful outcomes for kids. I just want to give you a moment to think. I want to bring us back together. You've done a little bit of thinking. And what I hope that you're doing here is that you're beginning to think about how might these realities play out in your own world. And how might you respond? And the beautiful thing about being in this moment is that we're all in this moment together, that no one is an expert on pandemic teaching, that all of this is stuff that we are all learning alongside one another. And so I hope that I'm simply providing a framework for you to begin to think about what might I try? How might I meet the needs of all of the kids that I'm getting back this fall? And so as we close out our time together today, I want to definitely leave you with a few frameworks for trying things. Again, no one is a pandemic expert, and anyone who shows up and says that they are a pandemic expert is lying to you, right? That we're all in this moment together. And so I want to leave you with some frameworks for beginning to try on ways to care for kids and to ensure their academic growth. But before I do, I want to return to those questions that we shared. And I want to give you a moment to really check in with me. Again, what is being confirmed for you right now? What new ideas or thoughts are emerging? And what questions do you have right now? And so I want to just pause and give people some time. You can weigh in the chat. You can approach the mic. You can unmute and share, but just what big thoughts are coming up as we turn our lens to a more student-facing way. What are the big thoughts that have come up for you? So I'm going to pause and just allow people to enter the chat, allow people to step to the mic. You can, if you're in the auditorium, you can approach a designee with your question or your concern. But what are the big things that are coming up for you as we kind of position ourselves to think about kids in a big way? I'll put those questions on the board so you can see them, but what's being confirmed for us this morning? What ideas or thoughts are emerging? What questions do you have? Absolutely. Yeah, I'm appreciating your thoughts in the comments. Absolutely. I love that Kathy is mentioning the idea of patience. And that's been a big idea that I've really been thinking about what patience means in the face of not just young people, but patience as we think about our curriculum, right? That we're not going to be able to move at the pace at which we're used to moving because kids are going to need a lot more. And so that patience, that understanding is not sidestepping our responsibilities to content. Rather, that understanding is fully embracing our responsibilities to the humans. And so really navigating that tension and embodying patience in every sense of the word. So thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing that. I love, Katie, your idea of flexibility. That's really, really beautiful. Yeah, so truly being responsive, right? And that means that we're flexible. That means that in some periods, I'll get further than in other periods. And that doesn't mean that I failed in one period and succeeded in another. That means that I've simply attended to the needs of young people here. And so that's really, really huge. Absolutely. And so as we move on, like one of the things that, and again, as thoughts emerge for you, I think it's really, really important that you have a place for these thoughts, and that we have ways to think about this together. One of the things that I always like to acknowledge that's coming up, because I want to spend the rest of our time talking about some things that we can try, right? What do we try to really, so that we can, meet kids where they are, so that we can be who we say we are in terms of being responsive. And one of the things that I've really struggled with, and I shared this with you all earlier, is my own fatigue. Like there are some days where I say to myself, Cornelius, like I can't try another thing. I am so tired right now, and as I look into the promise of this year, I am thinking wholeheartedly about the fatigue that I felt last year. And I don't want to go back there. And so I've really been thinking this year about how do I start the year addressing fatigue in healthy ways so that I don't have the same relationship this year to fatigue that I had last year. And one of the things that we know, and people talk about this all the time, right? People, even the word came up, self-care today. One of the things that we know is that the antidote to fatigue is rest. And so I want to just say quite openly to you that part of our path in serving kids is making sure that we rest, that our work is rest. And so I want to name that in every public and conceivable way. Now, I also want to problematize the idea of rest, that historically, when educators have thought about rest, we've thought about rest in really toxic ways. And so I want to detoxify rest, if I may. That historically, we've thought about rest in this way, and I'm going to call it subsistence rest here. I'm giving it a name. That historically, when we've thought about rest as educators, this is how rest typically goes as educators when we think about rest. That rest typically goes in this way where something at school or at work in the community fatigues us, right? And so then we go home and we rest up and we feel better. So for those of you who know me, you know that I'm a huge Netflix fan. I binge watch all the Netflix. So all the Bridgerton, all the Marvel shows, right? Like that's me, right? So I sit on my couch, I watch all the Netflix, I feel better. But then here's what happens. If you look at this list that I put on your screen here, something at work fatigues us, we rest up, we feel better. But then what happens is we go back to school, back to community, and we return to the very same thing that fatigued us in the first place. And so what happens is that need for rest still exists. It feels like this cycle that I can never take myself out of. I get really tired at school. I rest up, I watch all the Netflix, I feel better. I go right back to school, I get really tired again. So then I watch Netflix, I go back to school, and it's this cycle. I can never get out of the cycle, right? And so as I have thought about rest in more healthy and holistic ways, here is what rest is. And I am advocating for a different kind of rest this year. As we work together today, and I'll show you what it can look like. As we work together this year, the rest that I am advocating for is what I am calling restorative rest. Now, restorative rest is different than subsistence rest. Restorative rest is defined by two principal attributes. Restorative rest is defined first by creativity, second by innovation. And so here's what I mean by restorative rest. Restorative rest is when something at school or at work or in the community fatigues you. And so you go home and you rest up. But part of your rest has to be creativity and innovation. Part of the rest has to be learning how to change the thing that fatigued us. Because here's the thing. If I change the thing that fatigued me in the first place, if I eradicate the thing that fatigued me in the first place, when I return to work, I no longer return to that thing. Rather, I return to a form of clarity that allows me to actually do my teaching. This is what I'm advocating for here. This is freedom. And I want to show you how this can work. That when I think about, why things keep staying the same, why we get caught in that cycle, one of the things that I'm learning about myself is that imagination matters. That there are so many times in school where we talk about innovation or we talk about our commitment to kids, but then so few people are actually willing to make the profound breaks with tradition in order to serve the kids who have been most harmed by the ways that we do school. And so what I'm proposing for you all today as we prepare to meet students, what I'm proposing is a bit of an imagination protocol, right? Ways that we can innovate so that we can avoid the fatigue that characterized last year. So here's what this looks like for me, and I'm borrowing this from the late John Lewis, the great civil rights icon, John Lewis, the great American statesperson, John Lewis, right? The John Lewis, who was one of the architects of the Voting Rights Bill, the Civil Rights Bill, John Lewis, this great American icon. One of the things that he said, and he passed away, we lost John Lewis last year, and I became really inspired by his life and his legacy. And so I read almost every book that I could find on John Lewis, and I read, even his books for children. And one of the things that John Lewis said is that, imagination matters. And John Lewis says that we are no good for any national movement. We're no good for any academic or community movement if we cannot imagine tomorrows that are profoundly better than our todays. And so I'm always thinking about what does it look like to imagine a tomorrow for my classroom that's better than today. And so this is the protocol that I use when I am seeking to make necessary changes so that kids can have more of a home in my classroom, so that kids can have a better time learning, so that kids can have a better time growing. One of the things that I do is I examine the parts of my classroom where it's broken. So I ask myself, who is most often left out of my school or classroom community? So when I look at the 7th grade team, who are the kids, right, who aren't getting the grades? Who are the kids who aren't attending? Who are the kids who aren't participating? That's how you'll know who's left out, right? And so I ask myself that question, but here's what often happens in school. It can be really easy to blame the kids. It can be really easy to say, well, this kid isn't making the grades because there's something wrong with this kid, or this kid isn't doing well because this kid is bad. It can be really easy. I'm asking you to resist that urge. Rather, I'm asking you to do a little digging. What specifically are the kids left out of? Are they left out of rich experiences to build knowledge with their peers? Are they left out of opportunities to read? Are they left out of opportunities to do math or to perform music? What are they left out of? And once I identify the specific thing where kids' grades are falling apart, or their attendance is deteriorating, or their participation erodes, once I identify the specific areas, here's what my job becomes. My job then is, how do I reimagine this thing so that more kids can have access to this thing? So if it's not working for kids now, perhaps if I redesign the thing, it can. And then I test my idea. And so when I'm thinking about how we create student-centered classrooms and communities, it starts with this imagination protocol. I'll give you a very concrete example. Many of you know I'm a huge fan of literacy and science. That my background is I do a ton of work in chemistry and physics, and so when I work around the country, I tend to work with teachers who are really seeking to build science literacy. That's a lot of my work, and I got invited to a wonderful district to do some work. We were looking at the kids who were enrolled in AP chemistry and AP physics. We were experiencing some interesting trends there when we asked ourselves the question, who's most often left out? There's a group that came to mind, and I never forget the very first phone call when the district called me. They said, Cornelius, and this has been now the last 3 years, they're like, we've been looking at AP chemistry and AP physics test scores in the last 3 years. And one of the things that we're noticing, Cornelius, is that the girls score less than the boys in our district, that we're not experiencing the same success among our population of girls that we are among our population of boys. And so every year they said to me, when the scores come back, we're a little deflated when we look at the girls in comparison to the boys. And so they invited me, and this were their exact words. They're like, Cornelius, we need you to come help us fix the girls. There's something that is wrong in science. We need you to come help us fix the girls. Now, here's what I know. I know that there is nothing wrong with girls in science, you know. So one of the things that I was thinking, what could it be about how we're doing science in that district that we might need to change so that we can better serve girls? And so when I got to the district, I followed this imagination protocol that I really needed to know, okay, I'm seeing who's left out. So I see number one. I now need to know what specifically they're left out of. And so I asked some of the district leaders, can I talk to some of the girls in your community, specifically the girls who are enrolled in AP Chemistry and AP Physics? I would love to kind of get a sense of how things are going here. And so they're like, sure. And they identified, you know, some of the students. And so I was able to meet with some of the students and the parents. And I remember, I'll never forget, the very first meeting that I had was with a father and his daughter. His daughter was finishing her junior year. She was on her way to Stanford. Dad was so proud. It was just really beautiful to check in with Dad and to like, you know, meet his young chemist. And so, but I said to Dad quite candidly, you know, I'm here in the district because there's a lot of difficulty, you know, with making high marks on the AP exam, specifically among populations of girls. And your daughter is one of the ones that we're concerned about in the district. So I would love to talk to you about her experience. You know, she's taken both AP Chemistry and AP Physics. You've got a brilliant girl here. She's on her way to Stanford. And so I would love to know just like what your experience is as a family. And I'll never forget, like before daughter could even speak, Dad speaks up. And this is what Dad shared with me. Dad shares with me that he's like, oh man, this is an amazing district. They've given us every opportunity. But Dad shared these last years have been really difficult for us. And he's like, you know, typically kids start preparing for the AP exam late winter. You know, AP exam is early spring. And so he's like, kids in this community start getting ready late winter. And one of the ways that we get ready in this community, because, you know, we don't have money for expensive labs and we don't have money, you know, for expensive prep programs, the kids meet after school once a week to do a tutorial to get them ready for the AP exam. So the kids are all invited to come to school after school on Mondays once a week, and they study for about 3 hours in anticipation of the AP exam. And he's like, it's wonderful, but he's like, Mr. Miner, my daughter can't go. And here's why. And he said, my family, we don't own a car. And so winter time means that if my daughter goes to tutorial, that means that she's walking home after dark. And he's like, Cornelius, my daughter's 16 years old. She's about to be 17. I am not comfortable with my daughter walking home after dark in the neighborhood. He's like, you know, I do my best to get her to tutorial on the days when I can, but I'm not comfortable with her taking public transportation. I'm not comfortable with her walking. And so what we do on the days that she can't go to tutorial, we study at the kitchen table. You know, and so after school tutorial is an impossibility for our family because we only have the one car. My daughter doesn't own a car. And it was really interesting to listen to that father talk, because what happened was I went from family to family. That was the story, specifically for the young women. And so what I learned right away is that it wasn't that the young ladies were not equipped to do well in science. It wasn't that the young ladies were not powerful thinkers and mathematicians and scientists. What was happening is the way to succeed at the AP exam required you to be after school from 3 to 6. And so I remember getting back to the district and I asked the district, I was just like, is there any way that we could offer a tutorial during lunch or before school so that way kids don't have to watch? Because what was interesting, the girls were attending after daylight savings time when there was like daylight, but they weren't attending during the winter months when it was dark out. And so I said, anyway, and I remember the district saying to me, well, Cornelius, we've always done tutorials on Monday afternoons. This is just how it is in the district. Well, here's the thing. How it is in the district was leading to too many girls not being able to access the tutorial. And so our work became thinking, how do I reimagine tutorial so that more kids can thrive? And I remember saying to the folks at the district, I was like, what would happen if since you've always done it in the afternoon, let's have a quick experiment. What would happen if we offered a tutorial during lunch? And so I kind of challenged them. I was like, for a week and a half, 10 days, we're going to offer a tutorial during lunch. And so instead of 3 hours after school on one day, we're going to offer it for 10 days during lunch. Lunch is a shorter period, so we're just going to offer it for 10 days during lunch. And we're just going to see our numbers, track our numbers. Do girls come to tutorial? How well do they do as a result of coming to tutorial? We'll just try a short period. And what was really powerful to see, just by doing our research in that like small moment, what was really powerful to see was our attendance for girls went up over 100%. Like we almost doubled, well, we more than doubled like our attendance rate for people who wanted to study for AP chemistry or AP physics during the lunch period. And so what that showed us wasn't that kids were disinterested, right? Like people are like, well, the kids are disinterested. No, it wasn't that the girls were disinterested. It was that the girls didn't have access. And so our work this year, what I'm inviting all of us to do through this imagination protocol is I'm inviting us to think about ways that we guarantee access to children. Who's most often left out? And then how do we reimagine the things that kids are left out of so that kids benefit? That this is a year where we can be more than we've ever been. And this is a year where it will not require extraordinary labor. That this is a year where the only thing it will require is the willingness to reimagine, to try, to test our ideas, and to collect our data, right? That when I think about the way forward for us in years like this, when I think about what it means to be student-centered, this is action research. It's nothing new. This is us trying something so that we can be student-centered. This is us documenting our results and proposing changes. That this cannot be a year where we remain wedded to tradition and to how we've always done things. That this is a year where we can redesign things to be more student-centered, specifically for the groups of kids who have been historically left out. Our multilingual kids, our Black and brown kids, our poor kids, our queer kids, and our kids with learning disability. That this is a time where we can be the people that we say we are on paper. And I'm so excited to be working alongside you as we labor to do the best that we can for kids. And so as I close this out today, again, I hope that I've left you with a lot to think about, that we can look at what our kids are doing. We can look at the areas where they're growing and the areas where they're not doing well, and we can reinvent what we do every day to serve them powerfully. And so again, I just want to thank you for your time together today. I know that on these days, time is really, really precious. And so anytime you invest in a thing, it has to be time that is well spent and worth your time. And I certainly hope that this has been that. As you think about moving through the year, as you think about establishing your curriculum, as you think about getting things started, I hope that you carry with you this message of flexibility and innovation and creation. That we can resist the fatigue that we felt last year by simply thinking about the things that tap our energy and creating ways around those things, creating ways around the things that keep students mired to where they are, and creating ways back into engagement and a loving, supportive, didactic school environment. So thank you for all that you do. Beyond that, thank you for who you are. It has been a complete honor to be here today. I want to pause and in this last moment that we have together, just open the floor for final questions. But outside of that, it is amazing to work alongside you today. Good luck, all the best. Well, thank you for being here again. Very, very generous of you. And so we'll close out with any last minute questions or wonderings.
Amazing. Well, thank you, all of you who are present in the chat, and thank you, all of you who are in the auditorium. Again, such a powerful experience.